talked a little bit about, post-storm and maybe even end of season type perspectives, but um, how often or how frequently were you calibrating trucks? Is it something you did just once at the beginning of the season? You talk about application rates, and I'm guessing that there's really no way to know what your accurate application rates are unless you are calibrating trucks. And how often does that happen, and what's the value of that process?
That's absolutely a great question, and I'll just start off by saying I've had the great fortune to be able to speak at conferences and meetings across the country, and I am still amazed at the number of folks that aren't actually calibrating their vehicles, or because they come calibrated out of the factory, that there's an assumption that that means it's calibrated for their use. So for me, part of my duties when I was the director of statewide maintenance and operations was I oversaw the state equipment fleet also. So basically the folks that took care of the trucks and the mechanics and that. And so our goal was an absolute minimum of one calibration every truck for every item coming out. I mean, so if you're using a granular complex chloride, you calibrate for that. If you're using a complex chloride and sand mix, you calibrate for that, because different products flow differently through your truck. And so it's really important that every truck, every material, and that's solid and liquid material coming out of your truck. Ours was an absolute minimum of once a year. I highly recommend really a minimum of twice a year, beginning before winter, and then one midwinter. Again, for us, Alaska winters are very long, 5, 6 months, 7 months, depending what part of the state you're in. And so a midwinter calibration. And then another thing that folks need to remember, anytime you do any significant changes to the truck, you change hydraulics, you put a new auger in, you do anything of significance to the truck, you should recalibrate, because again, that changed the hydraulics. That's going to change again how the material flows through your truck. So, but there's that calibration. I just can't emphasize that enough, because how are you going to improve if you don't know how much is coming out of the back of your truck? And we tend to have, trucks are operated by more than one operator. And so, what one operator thinks is 150 pounds coming out of the back of the truck, to another, he may think, well, that's actually 200 pounds. So I think it's really critical to do that. With today's modern equipment, most of the equipment, the controller vendors, they're willing to come out and help and help calibrate their equipment. If you have the manual controlled spreaders, I know Redmond has great videos on calibration on vehicles. So there's a lot of help out there on how to calibrate. And to me, there's two big items when I do trainings that I want people to come out with a new understanding of. And one of them is calibration, and absolutely how critical that is to have that correct and know what's coming out of the back of your truck.
So, yeah, and I agree with the calibration and the importance of that. So every storm is unique, or it's different. Temperatures come in differently. The storm, maybe it's a wet storm or a dry storm or a really cold storm. How much impact does that have on application rates from storm to storm, and maybe even from area to area within even a small geographical area? Are application rates changing, and how do you determine your application rates, and how do you teach these drivers that it's just not one setting and you go out and do the same thing every storm? Touch on that a little bit.
Another great point. So, I said there's two things that are really important. I want folks, when I do training, to understand. Calibration is one, pavement temperature is the other, because anytime you're using any kind of chemical, liquid or solid, you need to know what the pavement temperature is. Because again, you need to have whatever the product is, the granular in particular, you need it to go into a brine. You need moisture, you need heat for that to happen. So again, application rates vary based on pavement temperature. Air temperatures are really important to know because they tell you trends. Is the pavement temperature going to start getting colder? Or is the pavement temperature going to start warming? So you need to know the pavement temperature, because whatever chemical, liquid, granular that you're using, it has I'll say a maximum, I guess, temperature where it's going to work at. So there's products that work, 20 degrees or 15 to 20 degrees is where you cut off the use of that product. There, other products go down to, 0 or 10 degrees. And so you need to know what the cutoff point is for the particular chemical that you're using, because if you exceed the capability of that chemical, you're applying that chemical that works at 15 degrees, but your pavement temperature is, 5, you're going to get premature refreeze. And there's what we call chemical ice. And chemical ice can actually be more challenging to deal with than just regular Mother Nature ice. So again, I think, every storm every storm comes in at different temperatures, and there's kind of good starting points, but it's all dynamic. And one of the things I always say is winter maintenance, anti-icing, de-icing, it's more art than science. You can have, written down application tables, got to be willing to adjust from that. Because again, you made the point, sometimes I come from, like, a lot of my career was in Southeast Alaska. It's a very wet snow. And what does that mean? That means rapid dilution, because there's so much moisture in that snow. I also spent, 5 years working basically in the Arctic, where it is a desert and it's snow, the snow, there's no moisture in the snow, and the snow just kind of blows back and forth all winter long. So there's the type of snow is completely different, that moisture content. And again, that's where I think, like, granular material is so important, because it starts off at 100% active material. And so if you have a wetter storm, that is, granular material, ice melt, is so much more effective, because it can withstand the dilution better than, say, a liquid product, because a liquid product is starting off at 70% water.
So with all those dynamics, I think what you've kind of explained is the importance of understanding, your pavement temperature, the air temperature, what your products can and can't do, knowing the difference of the practical or effective temperature of those products compared to, like, the eutectic. The eutectic temperature may not have a lot of bearing on how well that product performs based on whatever storm conditions you have. The humidity of the storm, and the dry snow, the wet snow, all those things are things that you're evaluating in each condition, in each situation. Tell me, I get this question a lot. You see plows out, and they're plowing, and they're not putting out product. And for the most part, the questions are, why are they going to the expense of putting that truck out there and pushing snow and not putting out a chemical to help melt? Can you touch on that and maybe help people understand why that might be the case?
So that's a great point. And so what happens, and I think where that people generally see that happen, is if it's snowing heavy. You have a pretty heavy snow, you have a pretty wet snow. It's, again, so much of winter maintenance, anti-icing, de-icing, it's about dilution. And again, you put your chemical out and things can, it starts diluting, and you want it to dilute because that's when it's going into brine. But like on really heavy snowfall or very wet snowfall, if you're putting out, whether it's a liquid or a solid, it can dilute so quickly that you're really not getting much bang for the buck on your product. And so I actually I had a city in Washington State come to me, and the superintendent was saying he was having to explain to his city council exactly what you're saying. They were saying, why aren't you putting more material out? Why aren't you putting more material out? Well, they had been through a training recently and learned that you got to give your product time to work. And again, there's certain cases where, whether it's a liquid chemical or a granular chemical, if it's not going to have the time to work and be effective because of the high rate of snowfall, it's better just to plow, do the manual method until the snow backs off, and then you go back to doing your chemical program. You'd probably be in a de-icing mode because you're going to have some of that's going to have bonded to the pavement. But again, getting that product time to work is really important for cost effectiveness and that.
And I'd assume too that a lot of people don't want to come back real frequently and plow active material off the road that hasn't had that time to work.
Yeah, and I mean, and that, we see that there's material out there. You still see the granular material on the road that hasn't gone to brine yet. Here comes the plow truck, that granular material that hasn't brined, so it's not working for you yet. It's now off on the shoulder. So, and again, one of the things I'll just say, I tell folks a lot of times, one way to tell if you have the appropriate application rate is at the end of the storm, look and see if you have products still sitting on the road or products sitting on the shoulder. Because if you see that salt, you see that complex chloride piled up, outside the fog line or even still on the road, it never went into brine. It didn't work for you during that storm. And then again, depending when the next storm is coming in, if there's an immediate storm following, okay, that may be not a bad situation. But if that storm is done and you're not expecting anything for a while and you have granular material on the road, that's material that's essentially wasted because it never went into brine. So there's a budget impact to that. There's chlorides going into the environment that didn't do anything for you. So again, that's a really good just eyeball thing to see at the end of a storm if you over apply.